This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Boosting the Israeli-Palestine ceasefire. Hamas chief in Egypt for conciliatory talks with rival factions. Insecurity strains health services in northern Mozambique. And the DRC begins phased return of thousands of people displaced by recent volcanic eruptions. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. The details in those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Ramanyang with the day's business headlines. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. South Africa's first quarter GDP data beats expectations with growth of over 4.5%. And this pandemic has cost OPEC countries to lose at least $1 trillion of oil revenue in less than 2 years. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in 30 minutes. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's begin in Egypt. Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh is in Cairo ahead of talks between Egyptian authorities and Palestinian factions. The series of talks, which could begin next week, is aimed at reinforcing a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. Egypt has played a major role in the brokering of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas following 11 days of conflict, which erupted on May the 10th. 250 Palestinians and 13 people in Israel were killed in the violence. Burkina Faso continues to deal with the aftermath of a militant attack which left at least 132 people dead. On Friday evening, militants attacked the village of Solhan, shooting at civilians, burning homes and a local market. The country's prime minister has visited the area to inspect the devastation. Ashtatal has more.
Prime Minister Christophe Dabiré's visit to Seba came on the heels of a horrific attack. 12 kilometers away in the village of Solhan, jihadists attacked civilians, burning down their homes. Officials say the attack is the worst in recent history.
This is the first time in our country that we've had an attack with such massive devastation of the population of our country. The president wanted us to carry a message of hope. We've fought against terrorism for some time. We've won victories.
At the Seba Health Center, health workers have been working to treat survivors of the attack.
We received a total of 40 wounded who were admitted to the health unit of Seba, and among the 40 wounded, there are 23 that were able to evacuate at the regional hospital center in Dori. We had heard that some had to continue in Ouagadougou city, considering the seriousness of their condition.
Following the attack, President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore declared 3 days of mourning. He called the act barbaric and said security forces were looking for the perpetrators. During his visit, Prime Minister Dabire urged the population to help the government in its effort to fight terrorism.
Security is the business of the government. This is the business of the defense and security forces. But it's also the business of the entire population. The population must engage with us to ensure that the enrollment of our young people stop, that our young people stay in the country to work for the economic and social development of this country so that we can share the fruits of this development. It's not good that we let these kids go. They'll enlist in terror groups, and it is they who will return to the villages to sow terror and desolation in their own families. We have to fight this.
In May, Burkina Faso launched a military operation to tackle the resurgence of militant attacks. The country has faced repeated attacks, with over 1 million people being forced to flee their homes over the past 2 years. Astatal, CGTN.
A delegation from the West African regional body ECOWAS is in Mali for mediation talks. It is led by former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan and includes Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister. Last week, the African Union and West African leaders suspended Mali from both organizations after the interim president and prime minister were ousted from power in a second coup in 9 months. On Monday, coup leader Colonel Assimi Goïta was sworn in as interim president despite international condemnation. The African Union and ECOWAS have been demanding a transition to civilian rule. Meanwhile, a demonstration was held in Paris earlier on Tuesday to call for the release of French journalist Olivier Dubois, who was kidnapped in Mali in April. Ross Cullen reports.
The demonstration on Tuesday was called for jointly by Libération, the French national newspaper for whom Olivier Dubois was working when he disappeared, and also by RSF, Reporters Without Borders, the freedom of the speech pressure group. And they were calling not just for the release of Mr. Dubois, but also for other journalists detained worldwide, particularly the case of 2 reporters who are being held in Morocco. Olivier Dubois disappeared in early April in the region around Gao in northern Mali, where he had travelled for an interview with a jihadist commander. We have seen him once since in a video where he appears in a tent in a desert, calling on his friends, his family and the French state to work for his release. And the French Foreign Ministry have confirmed his abduction, saying that it is most likely he is being held by a group affiliated with the so-called Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. We have recently heard from Olivier Dubois' partner. She has spoken of his great love for Mali, saying that he loved the country and the people. He's a 46-year-old father of 2, and he was based out of the Malian capital, Bamako, where he'd been working for several years. That was where he was based when he travelled to Gao for the interview, which ultimately, unfortunately, led to his abduction. This whole episode does, though, underscore just how dangerous it is for journalists to work in that part of the world. 2 Spanish reporters were killed in April, along with an Irish NGO worker, when they had travelled to a part of Burkina Faso for a report on illegal wildlife poaching. So France is trying to disrupt and dismantle these armed groups which are operating in countries like Burkina Faso and Mali and the other 3 G5 nations of Mauritania, Niger and Chad. Those countries and the Western partners of France, the United States and the United Kingdom, all trying to work together to reduce the prevalence of these armed groups and try to restore stability to the area. But the prevalence of the armed groups themselves, along with the presence of the military and the fact that these areas often have very weak government institutions, do highlight just how dangerous it can be for journalists to report in the Sahel. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
The United States has imposed visa restrictions on Cameroon separatists believed to be undermining peace efforts in the West African country. According to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, the United States is concerned by the continued insecurity in Cameroon and has urged both sides to negotiate for peace. Cameroon's 2 Western Anglophone regions have been gripped by fighting since 2017. Separatists have been trying to break away from the predominantly Francophone government. More than 3,000 people have died and 700,000 have been displaced in the violence. The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is starting a phased return of residents who fled Goma. This comes after a volcanic eruption and subsequent tremors caused widespread damage. The government said it would provide transportation to help residents return. The International Organization for Migration estimates that 245,000 people remain displaced in nearby towns and villages. Speaking to journalists, the country's prime minister said seismic activity in the area has stabilized, but some sites on the outskirts of Goma are now inhabitable. Chris Ochamringa is following the developments from Kinshasa.
Many of the people who were displaced by this disaster started returning last week because they found the conditions in the areas where they had sought refuge very tough, and so they came back to Goma and started living with their relatives. But the Prime Minister, who visited the area over the weekend, issued a statement saying they will start the phased return of people after experts from the Goma Volcanic Observatory announced that the threat of another eruption is unlikely, and so they said it's safe for people to return to their homes. So like you mentioned, the International Organization Migration estimates there are 245,000 people who are still living in the areas of Sake, Minova and Ruchuru that are near Goma town, and these people have been getting assistance in terms of food, water and shelter. There has been a coordinated effort by so many humanitarian organizations, the World Food Program, the UN Office for the Coordination of the People and the United States Agency for International Development, to mention just but a few. You know, Goma City is the headquarters of North Kivu province. This is a region that has had a lot of conflict, very many displaced people. So all these international humanitarian organizations there have been supporting people in other health emergencies and the displaced people. So they temporarily stopped what they were doing to support the people of the DRC. The government has also issued a lot of support to the people, and Congolese citizens in different parts of the country have also been mobilizing funds to support the people. So this disaster has really, unified Congolese people to support their compatriots who have been hit by this disaster.
Well, let's turn to Mozambique, where continued jihadist attacks have left over 700,000 people internally displaced. Since 2017, militants have been launching attacks in the town of Palma, located in the northern province of Cabo Delgado. Many have sought refuge in Pemba, the capital of Cabo Delgado, but the mass migration has put a strain on the city's health systems.
The continued violent insurgency in the Mozambique town of Palma has forced hundreds of thousands to flee. Many are seeking refuge in Pemba, the capital of the Cabo Delgado province.
If you look at what happened last year and this year, so we have roughly a sevenfold increase of people who fled from northern districts, from 100 to roughly 700,000. So obviously, this puts a lot of strains to existing infrastructure, health, education, everything.
The healthcare system has especially suffered from the influx. This comes as health facilities also grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is really a nightmare, and to be honest, it's very complicated to resolve these problems because these people are living in a very poor condition.
The International Committee of the Red Cross is attempting to tackle the issue. It built a new wing at a clinic in Pemba's Ingonan township. The health workers at the clinic continue to face several challenges as they treat those seeking shelter.
The challenge really is we do not have enough healthcare workers. At the moment, we're just 9, and we need more healthcare workers and facilities.
IDPs have also sought refuge in the homes of host families, but this has also put a strain on the community. The WFP warned that hunger in Cabo Delgado is on the rise. The head of the WFP in Mozambique appealed for $104 million to feed an estimated 950,000 IDPs and their host families. Astatal, CGTN.
Botswana is starting the second phase of its COVID-19 vaccination program. The program is first targeting people who received the Chinese manufactured Sinovac vaccine. Before the rollout, the country had bought 30,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine from India and later received a donation of the Sinovac vaccine from China. Angela Coppola has more on the story.
The Southern African country began its mass vaccination drive on 26th of March, with priority given to persons considered at high risk, like healthcare workers and the elderly. Those high-risk people who had received the AstraZeneca vaccine will be due for their second round or dose starting on the 21st of June, we understand. Meanwhile, citizens and other residents under 60 years of age haven't been given any confirmation yet of when they will get their first doses or which vaccine they will get. The government says this group will be informed in due course. In terms of vaccine supply, we understand that last week, Moderna announced a supply arrangement with Botswana to supply the country with an undisclosed amount of COVID-19 vaccines. In other news, De Beers Global site holder sales, the Botswana Diamond Company and the Diamond Trading Company of Botswana have pledged 55 million pula to support the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in the country. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Soon-to-be centenarian Emily Mohapi has become the oldest South African to be vaccinated, and she's urging her fellow citizens to do the same. The Soweto resident took the vaccine as she prepares for her 100th birthday, set to be marked in just a few months. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Emily Mohapi is 100 this year. She is the oldest South African so far to take a COVID-19 jab. Hesitant at first, she's happy with her decision.
When I came back from being vaccinated, I felt very strong. I even took out some of my clothes to wash them.
Emily was born just after the 1918 flu pandemic, which infected over 500 million people. but she says she's never seen anything as devastating as COVID-19.
Since I've lived, corona is the worst thing that I've ever seen in my life. Corona kills people.
Mohapi's bravery is inspiring others around her.
So when Mama Emily was going, I didn't see her, but people were telling me and they started registering me, and I was motivated and I decided to go.
It makes me very happy because when I saw Mama Emily get vaccinated, I told myself that Mama Emily is older than me and she's getting vaccinated, so I must go.
Fears over taking the vaccine remains a challenge. Hiccups around registration and accessibility is also delaying the process.
One of the major problems was that the vaccination stations where people are going to be vaccinated are not within the poor communities. Like for instance in Protea South, there's no vaccination station, there's no registration station.
Emily, meanwhile, is looking forward to her 100th birthday and has some good advice for a long life.
The first thing is everyone must get vaccinated. The second thing is keep busy and stay fit. I was working as a domestic worker and I was always making sure that I do something. That's why I'm still strong.
South Africa has almost tripled its vaccination count to 1.3 million jabs since the second phase began in May. Public participation is picking up, and Mohapi hopes it will encourage many others to do the same. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Major websites back online after an internet glitch caused an outage around the world. Plus, we highlight the changing patterns of wildlife migration in Africa.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me. Several websites are back online after a major outage linked to a US-based cloud services provider. A number of government, media and news sites stopped working this morning, including the New York Times, Reddit and the official website of the British government. Affected websites earlier displayed error messages and pointed to issues with Fastly. The company says it is looking into its global content delivery network. Fastly helps websites move content using less congested routes to reach consumers faster. To China now, where the herd of wandering elephants continues their epic journey through southwest Yunnan province, but not before taking a long rest in a village. It is their 6th day in Jining district, some 80 kilometers away from downtown Kunming, the provincial capital of Yunnan. After trekking 500 kilometers through forests, villages and trails, the herd took a break. Using drones, the monitoring team captured rare images of the sleeping elephants on Monday. Usually 3 or 4 adult elephants remain awake on guard duty, but this time all 15 fell asleep in a glade outside Shiyang village in Jining. The little one was surrounded by the adults. It woke up while the others were still sleeping, but failed to climb out of the adults' protective circle. With the herd on the move again, local governments have prepared trucks of food on a separate path to keep them away from populated areas. While here in Africa, animal migrations occur on land, sea and in the skies. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a look at the top 5 animal migrations on the continent.
Unknown to many of us, the largest wildlife migration in Africa takes place over the skies in Zambia. Known as the fruit bat migration, it occurs between October and December, when about 10 million fruit bats descend on the Kasanka National Park's Mushitu swamp forest. On land, the longest wildlife migration is found in Botswana. Here, zebras travel close to 1,000 kilometers. Their migration begins in early December between the Chobe River and Pan. Next, and perhaps the most famous wildlife migration on the continent, is the Great Wildebeest Migration, considered one of nature's wonders. It occurs throughout the year, reaching the climax between June and October. Close to 2 million wildebeest cross from the Serengeti in Tanzania to the Masai Mara in Kenya in search of greener pastures. Between the months of April and June, another little-known animal migration takes place. Millions of lesser and greater flamingo species fly in from neighboring countries to Lake Nakuru and Lake Bogoria along Kenya's Rift Valley for breeding. And between the months of June and November, attention switches to Hermanus in South Africa, where thousands of southern right whales arrive from their summer feeding grounds in the Antarctic. These whales migrate to the area known as Hermanus to mate and give birth. The migration begins in the Antarctic and covers about 5,000 kilometers. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Earlier, we spoke to Jim Justus Nyamu. He's an elephant research scientist and the executive director of Elephants Neighbors Center here in Kenya. We started by asking him the reasons behind the unscheduled animal movement.
The movement of elephants inside the park and ecosystem has somehow, we've never seen this kind of a new development of the movement of animals. The climate change has come, and during this period of time, we are supposed to have it's supposed to be actually the dry season, but it's dry cold here. And instead of animals spending a lot of time by the swamp, they're now wandering. So I would say this is an unscheduled movement. And what happened is it's affecting the entire ecosystem. We've also seen what is happening with water rising in Aboseri here. It's confusing animals. Their traditional movement, either it's migratory or dispersal, is somehow being affected with the new phenomena of water rising in this area. Most of the areas where we have wildlife, people feel that those are areas that look like they are empty. We've seen also even in Mara, when we block them with a development, whether it's sort of a development, whether it's a school or a road that is built there, animals never forget their movement. They never forget their roots. So what happened? They keep coming, intrusions. So what happened is escalation of human-wildlife conflict. And you've seen so many people have been killed because you can imagine if built on a road that the elephant used to pass and there is water. So they will have to pass there. And when they pass there, they find farms. So human-wildlife conflict now is actually recorded there. And they can even kill someone. We've also seen some places where dogs have been eaten because they are within the corridor where lions and cheetah and leopards were passing.
In South Africa, World Oceans Day is being observed, with the government promising to deal with problems such as the littering of oceans and the exploitation of the blue economy. This year's theme, titled The Ocean, Life and Livelihoods, resonates well with some of the issues that small-scale fishing communities around the country's coastline face daily, as CGTN's Travers Andrews reports.
South Africa is a country that is rich in marine resources and is a key exporter of fish globally. The ocean's role in the economy has become very important for the government's job creation efforts too. However, maintaining marine biodiversity has become a challenge due to some pressing issues.
Fishing is probably the biggest threat to marine biodiversity at present, but there are obviously a number of other challenges faced by the ocean, including pollution, particularly plastic pollution, chemical pollution. There's some evidences of habitat destruction against the coast.
And that spells bad news, especially for small-scale fishing communities around South Africa's 2,800-kilometer-long coastline. They rely on a healthy ocean to catch fish, but stocks are low on key fisheries, and the global pandemic is not helping as well.
It's very difficult to control the number of people that are going fishing, either as recreational or small-scale subsistence. The demand for seafood is very, very high. The rates of poverty and unemployment around the coast is at the highest level right now. And many people are turning to the ocean for food and some kind of economic relief.
Plastic pollution is another issue affecting small-scale fishing communities, as well as marine biodiversity. The South African Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment's Source to Sea initiative, though, aims to mitigate the situation by focusing on managing litter sources. Through the government's Operation Pakisa initiative, it hopes to tap into the blue economy in a major way and unlock new opportunities for small-scale fishing communities around the country's coastline. According to some experts, certain steps that can be taken could benefit small-scale fishing communities.
I think that the investment in small-scale fisheries, because they are low technology gear, they only harvest what they can in terms of their physical being, is important to make clear demarcated areas for small-scale fisheries in terms of maybe 12 nautical miles to say that this is exclusive for small-scale fisheries would be sustainable. Small-scale fisheries is a sustainable practice in itself.
For now, though, it's not just fishermen that are concerned about issues such as marine plastic pollution and overfishing. South Africans are growing concerned as well, and it's only through collective action that the health of the ocean can be maintained to sustain life and livelihoods. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Chinese firm China Aerospace Construction Group has launched a school empowerment program geared towards improving reading and communication skills among pupils in 3 schools in remote villages in Kenya. Under the program, selected primary school pupils will receive learning materials and solar lanterns to help improve their language skills and make learning easier. CGTN's Wilkisa Nyabwa has that story.
Pupils at Enteritoy Primary School in a remote village about 3 hours' drive from Nairobi prepared for a special ceremony. Today, they would attend the launch of a school empowerment program at their school. Chinese firm China Aerospace Construction Group partnered with a local charitable organization, 3E's Experience, to ensure that all the learners received learning materials.
I think it's quite important for the kids to get a substantial reading materials to make themselves more confident to speak out for themselves in the future. And for the kids, particularly in these quite remote areas, they have a very few chance rather than the kids in Nairobi or any other kids from the private schools.
While the younger children got writing materials, the older Standard 5, 6 and 7 children also received storybooks. These were previously hard to come by because parents found them costly to buy. Now, with the books readily available, each pupil will be required to read at least 1 storybook per month to help improve their grasp of the English language.
Once they're able to read, not only will they perform well in English and Kiswahili languages, but they will also understand questions in mathematics, geography, science, and then therefore they're able to improve generally, become better in all the subjects.
In addition to the books, each learner received a little solar lantern. Several homes in the area are not connected to the national electricity grid, meaning pupils were often unable to study at home.
These children come from very far. So some of them, they get up as early as 4 o'clock. So this lantern can also help them to see the way. She uses it at night or in the evening doing her preps, doing her own homework, revising her work, and then now she uses it as she comes back to school.
Pupils all over the country often find that learning is not just about having the will, but also gaining access to valuable resources. Tools such as solar lamps and storybooks then could make all the difference in their education journey.
It's now up to me to help my child learn at home as well, because now that we have got the materials, I also have to ensure the child uses these materials well.
Learners also planted trees to conserve the environment. Ntaritoi Primary School is one of 3 schools in the area selected to take part in the empowerment program that will also include mentorship visits. The schools fall within the Sultan Hamud and Oloitoktok areas, where the China Aerospace Construction Company is engaged in an ongoing project initiated by the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN, Ntaritoi.
Well, let's now go to Rama Nyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. South Africa's first quarter GDP data beats expectations with growth of over 4.5%. And the pandemic has caused OPEC countries to lose over $1 trillion in oil revenue in less than 2 years.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in South Africa. The country's economic output grew by 1.1% in the first quarter of the year, translating to an annualized GDP growth of around 4.6%. Now, the first quarter growth number marks the third consecutive quarterly increase in real GDP. According to StatSA, the growth was driven by finance and mining, which together contributed to 2.7 percentage points to GDP growth. Finance is the largest industry in the country. Trade was third in as far as being the biggest contributor to growth is concerned. It went up by 6.2%. It added 0.8 percentage points to GDP. Africa's most industrialized economy deteriorated very sharply last year after the government imposed a very strict lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. The economy contracted by 7% last year, mainly due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and related lockdowns that did happen worldwide. Now on to other matters, this one specifically in West Africa. The International Monetary Fund has approved $650 million in credit to Senegal to support the West African nation's recovery from the damage inflicted by COVID-19. This announcement follows an earlier credit issuance of $442 million to Senegal in April of 2020, also designed to mitigate the effects of the pandemic at that time. The fund says while the medium-term prospects do remain somewhat promising, Senegal's economic outlook for this year is facing a range of headwinds due to the impact of the pandemic on one hand, but also higher commodity prices on the other. Senegal's economy contracted by about 1.5% in 2020 compared to growth of 5.3% in 2019. The IMF now expects a modest recovery in 2021 with growth reaching 3.7%. It's forecasting growth of 5.5% in 2022. An interesting development in the world of cryptocurrencies. There was a bit of a sell-off today. Bitcoin falling by over 10% at one point. It's actually gone under $31,000. Other digital currencies, including Ethereum and Dogecoin, they all were not spared in that rout in the last 24 hours. It's not 100% clear yet what's driving the downturn, but some analysts are saying it might be related to concerns about scrutiny on cryptocurrencies after US officials managed to recover most of the ransom paid to hackers that had targeted and shut down operations of Colonial Pipeline. Bitcoin outflows hit $141 million in the week ending the 4th of June, representing 8.3% of net inflows seen this year. Now, for the year so far, the token still showed net inflows of about $4.2 billion. That's according to the digital currency manager CoinShare in data released earlier in the week on Monday. The data also does show that the cryptocurrency sector overall suffered outflows of over $94 million just last week. Now, speaking of the pandemic and its impact on commodities, Nigeria and other members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries lost roughly $1 trillion in revenue due to the decline in oil prices in 2015 and 2016. OPEC's Secretary General Sanusi Barkindo says that oil sector investments during the period crashed by $300 billion. Now, he noted that investments were choked off during the challenging periods in the sector, with exploration and production spending falling by 25% in those years. The OPEC official also observed that as the world economy contracted by 3.5% year-on-year in 2020, global oil demand fell by 9.5 million barrels a day. During the month of April 2020, in fact, oil demand fell by 22 million barrels a day. And the group is describing that as the most challenging period as a result of the outbreak of COVID-19. Nigeria says it is in discussions with Twitter after it suspended the U.S. social media giant services in the country. Foreign Minister Geoffrey Onyema said after meeting with diplomats that they were looking to resolve the row with the tech giant that has close to 40 million users in Nigeria alone. Here's CGTN's Alexandra Majala with more.
Nigeria says it's in discussions with Twitter after it suspended the U.S. social media giant services in the country, branding its users unpatriotic. The Twitter suspension has provoked an outcry from the international community and rights groups who denounced it as a threat to freedom of expression in Africa's most populous country.
We recognize that there are issues of responsible use of social media, but we remain firm in our position that free access to the ability to express oneself is actually very important.
We believe in human rights and freedom of speech, but all that also has to be used where freedom of speech is concerned responsibly, and where that is not the case, the government obviously has to take measures.
Nigeria said it was halting the platform's operations indefinitely on Friday, 2 days after Twitter deleted a comment from President Muhammadu Buhari's account referring to civil unrest that the firm said violated its rules. The presidency denied that the suspension was a response to the removal of that post.
Why we've taken this measure is to see to what extent we can rebalance these media as forces of good and stop them being used as platforms for destabilization.
According to NOI polls, a public opinion and research organizations, more than 39 million Nigerians have a Twitter account. The platform has played an important role in public discourse in Nigeria, with hashtags Bring Back Our Girls after Boko Haram kidnapped 276 schoolgirls in 2014 and End SARS during the anti-police brutality protests last year. Some Nigerian broadcasters are concerned the clampdown on Twitter is part of a more general crackdown against the media. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Egypt's parliament over the weekend approved a new bill that essentially opened the door for the North African nation to issue Islamic sovereign bonds for the first time on local and foreign markets. That bill got cabinet approval in November last year. It's waiting for the final vote. It needs 2/3 majority of legislators to approve it. If passed, though, it will essentially pave the way for Egypt to now be able to tap into the Islamic financing system, which saw at least $2.7 trillion worth of transactions globally by the end of June last year. Egypt's Islamic sukuks are expected to be offered in both the Egyptian pound and likely in the US dollar. Throughout September and October 2020, Egypt issued a range of sovereign green bonds worth $750 million, both in the domestic market and in London. They are the first of their kind in the Middle East and North Africa. The country has also retained its top spot in the Middle East and Africa in the offshore and outsourcing industry. That's at least as according to the 2021 Global Services Location Index report. The North African state's upgraded IT system, its low cost of skilled labour, these are all part of the reasons behind its success. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with that story.
Majorel, a global customer service provider to thousands of clients in 29 countries, has opened 6 centres in Egypt, employing almost 8,000 people with plans for further expansions.
Egypt has been an outsourcing offshore location for many years, right? So you find most of the leading BPO companies already present in Cairo for a very good reason. You look for 3 things in our business. One of them is, do you have the talent pool? Is there an available talent pool? And by talent pool, we mean capable professionals who speak various languages. The second, as it's really a large industry, which is also quite competitive, the costs are quite important for us. And the third, we also need a location which is scalable. Now, Egypt combines those 3 pillars. We have a large scalable pool of very talented professionals who are multilingual, who come at a good cost, and we can scale them to high numbers.
Majorel's growth here is a reflection of the strides Egypt has achieved in this sector.
According to the Kearney report, Egypt accounts to 17% of the international outsourcing market. It has 250,000 employees in the sector and serves 100 countries in 20 languages.
This success is mainly owed to the long-term strategy led by the government's Information Technology Industry Development Agency, or known as ITIDA.
We have a diversified government incentives program to make sure that it is directed toward attracting the right investors and in the right areas that are of interest to us and the emerging technologies. Like, for example, we provide extra incentives when it comes to artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, cloud, Internet of Things, and so forth. Also, we have investment, government investment that is increasing year over year. Government is investing heavily in providing training programs to our talent pool, and we do train on technical aspects as well as on language and on soft skills to make sure that our workforce is ready for the investments that is coming in.
The North African country has been exceptional in the areas of embedded software, mobile app and web development, as well as localization services to Arabize software for Middle East and Arab-speaking countries. But for some investors, there's a need to shed more light on these attributes.
Many US or European companies, Egypt doesn't pop up first when it comes to where we're going to outsource or offshore our solutions. You know, historically it has been India, it has been Eastern Europe, it has been the Philippines, right? But positioning in Egypt is something which we have to do more. So I believe the opportunity is actually to move Egypt in the top 5 or 6 with the right steps, with the right initiatives, with the right activities.
Egypt's outsourcing and offshore business also stood out due to its performance amidst the coronavirus pandemic.
Egypt has shown good resilience in the pandemic when it comes to the outsourcing business. We look in other countries, for example, they have suffered significantly when it came to the infrastructure availability, when the people went to work back from their home, availability of internet, availability of power, of laptops. When this all happened in Egypt, there was no interruption to the business, according to the testimonials that we had from many companies that invested in this sector in Egypt. We have massive national training programs in English, German, and French, also in Chinese. We will invest more in having promotions and campaigns that will reflect the right image of Egypt for the international investors in the international market.
And the efforts continue to attract more foreign investors to this growing industry. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Into the world of aviation, United Airlines has inaugurated its non-stop daily service between its hub in New York and OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg. United will be offering more non-stop services from South Africa effectively than any other American carrier. It's also the only one providing a daily non-stop service between Joburg and New York. Here's Angela Coppola with the details.
The service isn't Johannesburg focused. It's part of a broader Africa expansion strategy.
We started this about 2 years ago when we launched new service from Newark to Cape Town. Following that, in May of 2021, we launched our new service between Washington Dulles and Accra, Ghana.
The US is one of several countries that has put South Africa on a red list, warning its citizens not to travel to the country because of the heightened risk of exposure to COVID-19.
There's not really a travel ban. I mean, as part of the response to the world global health crisis, right? We've limited travel from some parts of the world, other parts, but I think the main thing that we've got going here is we have a flight coming from the United States every day. I just watched people get off the flight. The plane was full. These are Americans who are coming here who spend lots of money as tourists.
The South African tourism sector has been developing a two-pronged strategy to rebuild the country's tourism sector.
We launched our tourism sector recovery plan, where we started with the domestic market and now we're moving into international market. And as travelers arrive, and we are hoping that those who have red listed South Africa will see that there isn't a need for you to red list South Africa to put us on the red list, because it is safe for travelers to come here, and because we've contained the virus, we're managing the virus very well.
The South African Airport Management Company has also suffered extensive financial losses as international flights stopped almost overnight.
Their frequencies have been allocated to them at 7 frequencies, so they have a flight every day. This flight was 95% full. Tomorrow's flight on Saturday is overbooked. That's exceptional news for us in South Africa. It's going to give us a much needed boost in tourists who are coming in vaccinated into the country, staying long and spending money in South Africa. It's really great news.
This might be the first sign that the tourism sector in South Africa is coming back on stream again. Hopefully it's the start of a nice wave of traffic. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Stepping outside the continent now, trade between China and Central Eastern European countries has grown over the years. Two-way trade rose by over 80% in the 8 years since 2012, when China and the CEEC worked under unofficial multinational mechanism. The strong momentum continued into 2020. Annual trade exceeded the 100 billion mark for the very first time. One of the major contributors to that was the China-Europe Railway Express. China sent out over 12,000 freight trains to Europe last year. That comes as Central Eastern European countries like Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic all increased their critical stops or destinations. And finally, China's foreign ministries praised the last 30 years of cooperation within the ASEAN bloc. They're expecting another productive 30 years.
Over the past 30 years, China and ASEAN have been forging ahead hand in hand. The connotation of strategic partnership has been constantly enriched, and cooperation in the 3 major fields of political security, economy and trade, and social and cultural exchanges has birthed fruitful results. China is willing to work with ASEAN countries to implement the consensus reached by leaders of both sides, push China-ASEAN relations to a new level, and make the next 30 years more marvelous.
I'll leave you there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. In global business, we'll be focusing on budget, specifically Kenya's budget for the fiscal year starting in 2021 July. It will be tabled in Parliament on Thursday. East Africa's largest economy is planning to spend over $33 billion from the 1st of July, despite rising concerns about debt and enormous deficits as well. So, what's the tax policy you should expect? We'll have some answers for you at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead in your sports news. Tunisia's government steps in to support